The narcissist's reaction when you stop responding. And I want to begin with something that most content about this topic gets wrong in a specific and consequential way. Most content frames the stopping of your responses as a tactic, as something you do to produce a specific reaction in the narcissist, as a strategic move whose value is measured by the reaction it generates. And this framing, however understandable its appeal, is the first thing worth examining before we go anywhere near the reaction itself. Because if you stop responding as a tactic, if the stopping is organized around what it produces in the narcissist rather than around what it produces in you, then the stopping is not actually the thing most content claims it is. It is the continuation of the dynamic by other means. You are still organized around the narcissist, still measuring your behavior by its effect on the narcissist. Still inside the relational framework, the dynamic created even while appearing to have exited it. The stopping of responses that this episode is actually about is different from the tactical version. It is the stopping that happens when you have genuinely arrived somewhere in yourself that makes responding feel genuinely unnecessary rather than strategically inadvisable. When the not responding is the natural expression of a genuine reorientation of your attention rather than the deliberate withholding of something you are still producing internally. That distinction between not responding as tactic and not responding as genuine reorientation is the foundation of everything this episode examines. Because the narcissist's reaction to the first kind is different from the narcissist's reaction to the second kind in ways that are worth understanding precisely. Let's establish what the narcissist's system actually requires from your responses, because understanding what the responses we're providing is what makes the stopping's effect comprehensible. Your responses, even your negative responses, even the expressions of hurt or anger, or the careful maintenance of distance that most people in this situation think of as not giving the narcissist what they want, we're providing something to the narcissist system that the system was organized around receiving. The something is not simply admiration or warmth or the positive engagement that the love bombing was designed to generate. The something is considerably more fundamental than any specific quality of engagement. It is simply this: confirmation that you are still inside the dynamics framework. That the narcissist's behavior is still producing a response in you that is organized around the narcissist. That the relational framework the dynamic created is still the framework within which your behavior is being generated. Any response that is organized around the narcissist confirms this. The warm response confirms it. The angry response confirms it. The hurt response confirms it. The carefully maintained distance that is organized around the narcissist's presence confirms it. Even the strategic silence that is organized around what the silence will produce in the narcissist confirms it. All of these are responses to the narcissist, generated within the dynamics framework, organized around the narcissist's behavior, produced by the relational structure the dynamic created. And the narcissist system, reading not the content of the responses but the fact of them, the fact that behavior is still being organized around the narcissist, receives this confirmation as the regulatory resource it has always been. The first phase of the narcissist's reaction when the responses genuinely stop is the one that arrives most quickly, and that is most frequently misread as evidence that the stopping is working in the tactical sense the content usually describes. It is the escalation. The contact attempts increase in frequency. The channels multiply. The register shifts from the calibrated, strategically organized approach that the ordinary supply seeking produces to something that has a slightly more urgent, slightly less managed quality. The messages that arrive carry a different texture from the ordinary hoovering sequence, less organized around the specific frequencies that the relationship's history revealed as most effective, more broadly deployed across whatever channels remain available. This escalation is real. It is the narcissist's system responding to the disruption of the confirmation supply it was organized around receiving. But here is what is important to understand about the escalation. It does not indicate that the stopping has produced the recognition or the reckoning that the tactical framing implies. It indicates that the confirmation supply has been disrupted and that the system is running the standard supply restoration response to the disruption. The escalation is the system doing what it always does when supply is disrupted. It is not the system having understood something significant about the stopping. It is the system attempting to restore what the stopping removed. The second phase arrives when the escalation does not produce the restoration. When the increased contact attempts and the broadened channels and the shifted register have not generated the confirmation supply, the escalation was designed to restore. And the second phase is more specifically revealing than the first because it is less organized, less managed, less the product of the system running its standard response, and more the product of the system running its standard response and finding it insufficient. The contact that arrives in the second phase has a quality that experienced observers consistently describe as more raw than the first phase's escalation, less strategically framed, more specifically personal, containing references to the actual relationship and the actual history that the strategically organized first phase tended to approach more carefully. This rawness is the actual self's response beginning to surface alongside the system's management of the disruption. And its surfacing in this specific form is one of the most honest things the narcissist's behavior produces across the full arc of the dynamic. What the rawness reveals, and the third phase that arrives when the second phase also fails to produce the restoration, and what the full sequence of the narcissist's reaction to your genuine stopped responses ultimately means for the person who has genuinely stopped, or that is exactly where we are going next. What the rawness reveals is something worth receiving carefully rather than either dismissing as manipulation or interpreting as the genuine reckoning it resembles but does not yet constitute. The rawness reveals that the actual self has been activated by the stopping in a way that the ordinary supply disruptions do not activate it. Because the ordinary supply disruptions, the temporary withdrawals, the angry distances, the strategic silences, all produce the system's standard restoration response without requiring the actual self's involvement. The system handles them. The calibration adjusts. The tools are recalibrated and redeployed. The actual self remains in its ordinary position below the construction's management. The genuine stopping, the stopping that is organized around your own genuine reorientation rather than around producing a specific effect, activates the actual self because the actual self recognizes something in the genuine quality of the absence that the ordinary disruptions do not carry. The genuine absence feels different from the strategic absence. The actual self, which has its own perceptive capacity that is distinct from the construction's operational assessment, registers the difference. And the rawness in the second phase's contact is the actual self responding to what it has registered. This is real. The actual self's activation is genuine, and it is not sufficient grounds for responding. Not because the actual self's experience does not matter, because the actual self's activation, however genuine, does not alter the construction that will govern what happens if the contact produces the restoration the second phase is seeking. The actual self can be genuinely activated, and the construction can simultaneously be genuinely ready to reassert the moment the restoration occurs. Both are true, simultaneously, always. The third phase arrives when the second phase also fails to produce the restoration. And the third phase is the most variable of the three, so the most dependent on the specific narcissist, the specific relationship, and the specific circumstances of the stopping. For some narcissists, the third phase is the supply landscape reorientation, the system redirecting its resources toward other available sources, the monitoring reducing its intensity, the former supply source being filed in the category of concluded rather than interrupted. This is the most common third phase. The system is efficient. It does not maintain indefinitely the resource expenditure of trying to restore a source that is not restoring. It redirects. And the redirection is not the recognition of anything significant about the stopping. It is the system managing its resources optimally given the information the failed restoration attempts have provided. For some narcissists, The third phase contains something that the first two phases did not contain, not change, not the reckoning that genuine accountability would require, something more preliminary and more fragile. A specific quality of private reckoning that arrives in the unmanaged moments, the 3 a.m. quality, the background wrongness of certain silences, that is more specifically organized around the genuine stopping than the system's ordinary unmanaged content is organized. This private reckoning is not accessible from outside, is not expressed in behavior that would confirm its presence. Lives entirely in the actual self's territory, where the stopping has created a specific shaped absence that the ordinary supply from the current landscape cannot fill in quite the right way. This is real. Its reality does not require your attention or your response to continue operating. It operates regardless, permanently, in the interior of a psychology that lost something specific when the genuine stopping finally arrived. What all three phases together mean for you is the most important thing this episode can offer, and it requires saying clearly rather than gesturing toward. Your not responding is not primarily for the narcissist, is not primarily measured by what it produces in the narcissist, is not primarily justified by the reaction it generates or the reckoning it might eventually produce, or the permanent consequence it creates in the interior of someone who lost your genuine engagement. Your not responding is for you, is the natural, healthy, self-respecting consequence of genuinely arriving somewhere that has no further use for the dynamics framework as the organizing structure of your behavior. The narcissist's reaction, the escalation, the rawness, the third phase's resolution in whichever direction it resolves, is the narcissist's reaction. It belongs to the narcissist's psychology. It is information about what your genuine presence was providing and what your genuine absence removes. That information is useful for understanding. It is not the point. The point is where your attention goes when it is no longer organized around generating, managing, or strategically withholding responses to the narcissist. The point is what you build in the space the genuine stopping creates. The point is the specific quality of your daily experience when the dynamic is no longer the primary framework within which your behavior is generated. That quality, quiet, unglamorous, genuinely yours, is the most complete answer to everything the dynamic cost you that is available. Not because it compensates, because it is what the cost was preventing. And the genuine stopping, the kind that is organized around your own genuine reorientation rather than around the narcissist's reaction, is what makes it finally, fully available.